Thank you very much, Andrea. I know we have our colleagues and members from all of our agencies that are represented in JPAC from all over the state that are on this Zoom meeting right now with us. I will start by saying how happy I am to see all of you. Well, I can see some of you. Some of you are stalking with your cameras and your microphones off. I'll note this meeting, this virtual meeting is, of course, over the lunch hour. Is lunch hour even a thing anymore? But anyway, it's over the lunch hour. This is officially an eating acceptable meeting. Okay, I don't know about you. I'm going to be eating my lunch during this meeting. You are welcome to do so as well. You can even keep your camera on. It's like we're virtually having lunch together, which is what we have normally done historically with JPAC. We've gotten together, we've broken bread together and collaborated. We're not doing that right now. It is our hope, however, that at least for a few of our 4 JPAC meetings scheduled during 2022, we will gather in person. Perhaps we'll do site visits associated with JPAC meetings to see critical transportation infrastructure. That is yet to be determined in detail, but hopefully we will be able to come together at some point later this year. I'm Andrew Gruber. I'm the Executive Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And for those of you who are wondering, why am I the one who's talking right now? It's because this year, WFRC has rotated into administering JPAC, the Joint Policy Advisory Committee. We're very happy to play this role, but that role has passed year by year among WFRC, MAG, UDOT, and UTA. And this year we have the privilege of coordinating that. So I get to administer these meetings, which also means that Andrea gets to administer these meetings. And Andrea, thank you very much for your help and participation in doing so. Andrea dropped into the chat the agenda for today. Andrea, maybe do it one more time just in case anybody else joined us after you dropped it in there. And what you can see, and I'll do this just for ease. I'll put the agenda on my screen here. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, please. Okay. Here's what our objective is today. I'm going to do a brief reminder for those of you that have been doing this for a while. And for those of you that are new, an introduction to JPAC's purpose, structure, and then our schedule, anticipated schedule for the year. Then we're going to turn to MAG and UDOT to talk about probably the prime example of the outgrowth of JPAC's work and our shared work together, which is, of course, Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. The schedule for this year, what it is, the schedule for this year, and then we'll talk a little bit about the messaging around that Unified Transportation Plan. And then we'll get into the 2 areas that I know many of us have focused a lot of attention on, what emerged from the state legislative session that is relevant to transportation. Answer, a lot. And then federal, what emerged at the federal level that impacts transportation. Again, a lot. With the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You all know that you have those of you that have an affirmative role in this meeting, you know who you are, your names are on the agenda. But I want to be really clear here that this is fair game for anybody to participate, to contribute, to ask questions. And by virtue of saying that, I'll use that as my introduction to the purpose of JPAC. But first, I guess I should ask for approval of the meeting minutes. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes, please?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Carlton Christensen, second by Carlos Braceras. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the meeting minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, meeting minutes are approved. Okay, terrific. JPAC, its purpose, its structure, and the schedule for 2022. There are several people on this meeting who have been around in Utah transportation longer than I've been at it for 11 years now, 11 wonderful years here in Utah, that could tell the story of JPAC. I'll try to do the short version and anybody can contribute. I'll start with where we are today, which is being regarded around the nation as a model for collaboration in transportation. It's not just me saying that. The U.S. Department of Transportation cites Utah as being a model of collaboration. They look to the Utah Unified Transportation Plan, which in of itself cites the fact that you can see here on the screen that the Joint Policy Advisory Committee brings together policymakers to discuss issues, resolve inconsistencies, and build consensus among transportation entities. JPAC was actually created all the way back in 2002. And I'll put on the screen here the original memorandum of agreement. Doesn't this look antiquated to see a document that looks like it was almost typed out longhand? But this is back in 2002 when JPAC was first created. We'll tell you a little bit about the motivation that came out of that, but in just a moment. But it was created and it's been amended a few times. The last time it was amended was 2007. And I'm going to go to that 2007 update to the memorandum of agreement.
Yes,
and you can see here, as you look at the membership, we have representation from UDOT and the Transportation Commission, UTA, and all 4 of the metropolitan planning organizations in the state of Utah. And just reading this together, the function, JPAC functions as an advisory body to its member agencies. What that means is JPAC in of itself is not a body that takes action, doesn't have any formal authority. Each entity retains its own authority, but it brings members together to share information about current and future travel in urban areas, future funding needs, and other critical transportation performance measures and issues. And we, the members of JPAC, have the opportunity to reach consensus on how to meet the transportation challenges facing the urbanized areas in the state. I will say why urbanized. The metropolitan planning organizations have the responsibility in collaboration with UDOT and UTA to do planning in the urban areas. Although I will say UDOT, of course, does the majority of that planning in the rural areas. And by virtue of UDOT's participation, we are also thinking about the rural areas, the entirety of our state. And just really briefly, it's a forum for discussing transportation planning and programming issues, encouraging seamless transportation systems by synchronizing long-range plans and coordinating short-range programs of projects across planning boundaries. That's key. And this maybe is really the heart of JPAC, is the recognition that what impacts somebody who, let's say, lives in South Jordan, and I know we have Mayor Ramsey with us, and works in Utah County, there has to be coordination across jurisdictional boundaries. There also has to be coordination across modes of transportation, driving state roads, driving city and county roads, all forms of transit, and increasingly active transportation, biking and walking as a means of transportation. So coordinating across geographic boundaries, coordinating across modes of transportation. Then considering financing strategies necessary to fund projects, and then making recommendations to member agencies, again, that's us, our agencies, actions to achieve those goals. So in a nutshell, that's the objective, the purpose of the Joint Policy Advisory Committee, which again, we should all be proud that this collaborative approach we take here is not something that happens in every other state in the country. Let me actually stop sharing now. Bear with me for 1 sec. This collaborative approach that we take in Utah is, again, not something that happens to this degree in every other state in the country. I and several of you have worked in transportation and government in other states around the nation. And I know this firsthand, that the transportation agencies don't always work together. The transportation agencies and the local governments don't always work together collaboratively. We are a model for the nation in that regard. That does not mean we can take it for granted. It also doesn't mean it's perfect, which is why JPAC continues forward and acts as a forum for this collaboration. And I would just say thank you to all of you, the member agencies, and particularly the elected officials, the city and county officials, who we're going to have an opportunity for introduction of momentarily. I would say particularly thank you to you, because the county officials and city officials that are here, for none of you is this your primary job, right? Your primary jobs are doing other things, but on behalf of your communities and behalf of your agencies that you participate with, your MPOs, you participate here with us as we work for the future of the entirety of the state. I'm going to ask if anybody wants to supplement briefly the sort of history and purpose of JPAC before we turn to the introductions of our members. I'll just open that up to anybody on the call here.
Andrew, I do want to point out there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you saw that as you were walking through that.
Yeah, Commissioner Fackrell from Morgan County asked, why does it say urban and not regionally on the goals? I did mention that briefly, but Commissioner Fackrell, the mention of urban is mainly tied to the fact that the metropolitan planning organizations are officially charged with doing transportation planning in urban areas. So when entering into that agreement many years ago, there was a sensitivity and a respect that we did not want to overstep the notion that I wasn't there when this was signed, but that we did not want to overstep and presume that we would have a role in doing the planning in rural areas. Having said that, and of course, Morgan County is in of itself definitionally a rural, not an urban area per the census, you know that we work collaboratively with you and we help you. And UDOT has the official responsibility for doing transportation planning in the rural areas. So that notion of mentioning urban only is more an artifact of a legal structure more than it is a statement of our practice and our intention right now. And Commissioner Fackrell, your being here personally bears that out because you're representing a rural county. So we think about the entirety of the state, and the Unified Transportation Plan, our primary product, if you will, is statewide as well. Hopefully that addresses your question.
Okay.
That whole space out there.
Okay.
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 Sounds good.
Anybody else want to contribute anything about the purpose or history of JPAC?
Andrew,
Yes, Commissioner.
I just want to say you guys have done a great job. I was just curious as to why that goal had only urban and not the region. That's all I was asking for, because you guys have done a great job for us. I mean, a superb job. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate that, and the great partnership we've had with Morgan County and Morgan City and UDOT, and working with you and others has been terrific. Okay. Now I'm going to shift over and we're going to do introductions. What we're going to do is we're going to actually turn to each agency and ask you to introduce the participants that you have in this meeting from your area. Okay. And so in no particular order, I'm going to start down south. Myron Lee with the Dixie MPO. Introduce yourself and whoever you have here representing your agency, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Myron Lee with the Dixie MPO. As everyone knows, the Washington County is experiencing unprecedented growth, and we're urbanizing more and more. And so we feel like it's very appropriate for us to continue to be on the Unified Transportation Planning Group and a member of JPAC. Joining us from Washington County is County Commissioner Gil Almquist. Commissioner Almquist was appointed about a year ago to fill that role, and we have asked him to fill in on this board. Gil, if you'd like to add to your credentials there and speak about yourself, but we're excited to continue to be part of the joint policy group here.
Thank you. Thanks, Myron. And elected officials, you can feel free to introduce yourselves. You don't need to also, but if you'd like to say something, you're more than welcome to. Thank you, Myron. Okay, let's then jump up north to Jeff Gilbert, Executive Director of the Cache Valley MPO. Jeff?
Morning, everyone. I'm fortunate to have Mayor Brian Cox from the Cache MPO. He's the mayor of Hyde Park City and the chair of the CMPO. Mayor Cox, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself or say anything. Maybe not. And then typically we have Todd Butler. Oh, go ahead,
Hi.
Mayor.
I was just gonna say, hello, everyone. Jeff and I have a history of working with each other, but this isn't my first turnaround in working with the CMPO. I was there 5 years ago, and I had served 2 terms and was worked with him in the CMPO, so kind of a return to familiarity.
Yeah, Mayor Cox did a reboot and came back for more, so we're lucky to have him. And then we have Todd Butler, who normally joins us. He's the manager of the Cache Valley Transit District. I don't think he was able to join today, but he is also the vice chair of our executive council. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Andrew, this is Myron. It looks like Gil is struggling to unmute his phone. Gil, have you been able to do that at this point to where you can introduce yourself? Let's come back to that later.
Okay. Okay, great. Now let's go to the Mountain Land Association of Governments, and I'll turn to Andrew Jackson, the Executive Director there.
Yeah, thank you. So on the call, I know some people are jumping in as I was just looking through the participation list. So there may be some people I didn't catch, but we have, as MAG staff, we have Sean Elliott, who's our MPO director, Michelle Carroll, who's our deputy director of the agency. We also have Commissioner Lee from Utah County, Trustee Acerson from Utah County, and Mayor Fulmer / Planning Advisory Committee member, Mayor Fulmer from Vineyard, and myself.
Great, thanks, Andrew. The 2 Andrews, the MPO Andrews on the Wasatch Front, my partner. Okay, and now I'll turn to, let's see, Carlos Braceras, the Executive Director of UDOT, please.
Yeah, this doesn't work up here.
Thank you, Andrew. Carlos Braceras with UDOT. We have joining us on the call, just looking through here, Terry Newell, our Deputy Director for Planning and Investment.
Carlos, you just muted yourself.
That's pretty fancy. Somebody must have muted me.
Okay.
I think Gil is, his mic's working now, and I think he's bumping into Carlos.
Okay. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Commissioner Elmquist, can you hear us now? And did you want to just say hello? You're muted, Commissioner.
Okay, now you can hear us?
Yes.
We're having big problems down here because all the northern Utahns drank our water. And so our electrical power generation is weak. I'm just kidding. Anyway, all of what you're doing, I'm just trying to get onto our computer here at Zoom at the county office. But hello to everyone. It's my first time. I love what Andrew is saying so far, what I heard on my phone. And as soon as I can get to the computer in the office up running, I'm going to jump over there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Carlos, let's go back to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So again, Carlos Braceras, Utah DOT. Terry Newell's on the call. She's our Deputy Director for Planning and Investment. I know Ben Hewitt, I saw his name on here. There he's waving his hand. Director for Group Leader for Planning and Programming. And I saw Andrea Olson's name. Andrea, wave your hand. Andrea is our Planning Director. And Was Eileen on here? Eileen Barron. I see her name as well. She does communications in our planning area. Thank you, Andrew.
Great. Thanks, Carlos and team UDOT. Now let's go, excuse me, to UTA. Jay, I'll turn to you. Jay Fox, the new, can I still say new? You're still new, right? New-ish Executive Director of Utah Transit Authority.
Yeah, this is day 80, Andrew. So
Okay.
we're good. I'm 10 days away from reporting to Carlton on my 90-day plan.
Okay.
So we're doing well. Actually, let me turn first to you, Carlton. Anything that you wanted to share to begin with?
No, we're just, first of all, we're delighted to have Jay as part of the UTA team. And I also know that I think I saw remnants of my two colleagues, Beth Holbrook and Jeff Acerson, who along with some of our planning staff and community engagement with Nicole Bardot and Russ Fox. And so, Jay, do you want to give just a little bit about?
A little bit about, I'm sorry, I missed the last thing you said, Carlton.
But do you want to just give a little bit of background to yourself?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge Nicole Bordeaux, Russ Fox, no relations, to our Director of Planning is on the line, as well as Michelle Larson from Senior Government Affairs Specialist is here as well. Just a little bit about me. I think I'll give you the transit relevant history. So I was with the Federal Transit Administration for 7 years in Region 3, which oversees grant funding for 5 states in the District of Columbia. It's based in Philadelphia, where I lived actually my entire life until just a short while ago when we moved out here. Just prior to coming here, and I spent 15 years, by the way, at the Department of Transportation, first with FAA and then with FTA. Just prior to being here, I was at the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, SEPTA, which is the regional transit provider for the Philadelphia area. It's a pretty large service area, over 2,200 square miles. I will say that my first 80 days here have been wonderful, not only working with an amazing team at UTA, but getting immersed in the community. And I think one of the greatest things, Andrew, that I felt after 80 days is when I look at the screen and I look at the names. There are so many people that I already know, I've already spoken with, I've already began to work with. So, and actually, including just a couple of days ago, Myron, who we served on a panel together over at Utah ITE along with Carlos. So this is it's been a real pleasure for me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay, and to all the UTA team. And I'll acknowledge Carlton as the board chair has been a really regular participant with JPAC in wearing various hats over the years. So Carlton, thank you for that. Now, I know I'm going to get to WFRC in just a moment, but we've introduced the transportation agencies here in the state and the other MPOs. While they are not technically members of JPAC, we are very happy to have our friends from FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, on with us. Ivan Marrero is the FHWA Utah administrator. Ivan, will you introduce yourself and your team here, please?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew, and hi, everybody. I'm Ivan Marrero. I'm the division administrator here in Utah for the Federal Highway Administration. And first, I want to welcome Jay to Utah, to the team. It's nice to have an ex-USDOT person joining us. I'm sure it won't take him long to realize that every word that has been said by Andrew about the level of collaboration and that we do here in Salt Lake City and in Utah is second to none. So and we take every opportunity we can at Federal Highways to promote what we do here to other parts of the country. So welcome, Jay. From Federal Highways today, we have Brigitte Mandel, who's my deputy division administrator, attending, and also Jennifer Elskin, who is our program delivery team leader. And if you remember Steve Call, who went on to a different assignment in Federal Highways, Jennifer has taken over for Steve, and I'm not sure if this is her first JPAC or not, but you will hear from both Brigitte and Jennifer later on in the agenda. So thank you, Andrew.
Terrific. Thanks, Ivan and team. And I'll just acknowledge something that probably doesn't need saying, but I'll say it anyway. Here in Utah, the FHWA, they are really our partners for all of us in transportation. They work with the FTA, also the Federal Transit Administration, and help us accomplish our shared goal. So we so greatly appreciate their partnership. And that brings us to the last entity here. That's the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And today, if I've been doing my screen snooping accurately, we have with us Jeff Scott, who is a Box Elder County Commissioner, Rod Westbrook, who's the mayor of South Weber City in Davis County, Bob Stevenson, Davis County Commissioner, Blaine Fackrell, Commissioner from Morgan County, Jeff Silvestrini, Mayor of Mill Creek City and the current chair of the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Don Ramsey, Mayor of South Jordan City and the current president of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, Gage Frere, Weber County Commissioner. And then from our staff, in addition to myself and Andrea, who've already been noted, we have Ted Knowlton, Jory Johnner, Julie Bjornstad, Miranda Jones-Cox, Mike Sobchak, Rosie Hernandez, and Ned Hacker, maybe. And then also from other staff from our area, we have Helen Peters, who works in transportation and planning in Salt Lake County. I'm not sure.
Mayor Wilson.
I'm sorry?
Representing Mayor Wilson, who is on the committee.
Yes, she is indeed. And thank you, Helen. There are other members that are on JPAC from our area, and I know from your areas as well, who are not able to be with us today, but we appreciate everybody's membership. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody from the WFRC area in a way that's perhaps a slight bit or disorganized. I'm going to ask if any of our elected officials from the WFRC area want to make any brief comments, and I'll start Mayor Silvestrini as the chair of WFRC with you, if you or others want to say anything briefly.
No, I'm just looking forward to the collaboration that this group has already established and has been recognized. So, and I also think that from my experience in talking to people on a national level, our efforts in Utah have been recognized by them. We, Andrew and Miranda and Mayor Ramsey and Commissioner Stevenson and I had the opportunity to attend the National Association of Regional Council annual meeting in Washington, D.C. And we rubbed shoulders with a number of other MPOs from other parts of the country, and they all were jealous basically of the collaboration we have. And we heard stories about how some of the MPOs weren't even able to get the attention of their Department of Transportation in their state. I won't name the state, but I'm certainly happy that we don't have those problems in Utah. So thank you, Andrew.
Thanks a lot, Mayor. Others I see, I'm going to do it this way, just looking at my screen with cameras on. I'm just going to go in no particular order. I see Commissioner Scott and Commissioner Stevenson. Did either of you just turn your mic off if you want to say something? Commissioner Scott?
Happy to be here. I've been on JPAC for a couple of years, and I've really enjoyed the collaboration with other folks from around the state. I think it's been invaluable as we've had questions up here in the north. We consider ourselves herbal, a little bit urban, a little bit rural. And so we've been able to learn from everybody. And some of the field trips that we've had have been amazing. We've been able to pick up some things that we've implemented here, and hopefully we've made our county better for it. So appreciate everybody's willingness to share.
Thanks, Commissioner. And then Commissioner Stevenson and then Mayor Ramsey.
Sure. Jeff, I want you to know that I've heard people call you guys worse things than herbal, just so you understand that as far as that goes. No, we're grateful for everybody, and it is a great collaboration with how we're able to work within the state. That's why we're seeing so many things done, and we're again grateful for Carlos and his leadership and Andrew's leadership.
Thanks, Commissioner. Mayor Ramsey.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate the chance to be here. I'm new. This is my first meeting here with JPAC, but it is not my my first meeting regarding transportation in the state of Utah. And I had the chance to be part of this for a little over 4 years. And I just really appreciate the chance to be here with all of you to work collaboratively. And I'll echo what's been said by so many of you, that what we have here in the state of Utah, our unified transportation plan, it's actually the envy of other departments in the state of Utah. You know, there are our water folks, we have great water folks who are talking about, they used this as an example yesterday in a meeting and said, you know, it'd be great if we could put together a unified water transportation or water plan, you know, infrastructure plan, similar to the transportation plan. Anyway, it's great work that you've all done. And I just appreciate the chance to be here and to hopefully contribute to the dialogue and be part of the process and learn from all of you as well. So thanks.
Mayor Ramsey, thanks. And I'll also note Mayor Ramsey is the chair of our regional growth committee that's responsible for looking out decades into the future and planning for the future. So thanks, Mayor Ramsey. I see Commissioner Frere, who turned his camera and mic on. Commissioner Frere actually chairs our economic development district as well. Commissioner Frere.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is my first trip to JPAC. You know, with the transportation, we've dealt with economic development for the past couple of years. And I just say, you know, this is a shout out to WFRC as we bring this Wasatch Choice Vision together. Andrew and I were, along with the mayor, participated in the Governor's Economic Opportunity Commission yesterday. And what Andrew does with the WFRC really helps direct policy in this state. So as we continue forward, I'm looking to some great results out of this committee and the others that represent the WFRC. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner, I appreciate that shout out, and it won't surprise you, anybody, that I'll respond to that by saying this is the work that we do is all done together by everybody here, by the agencies, the staff, the elected officials, city and county and state officials. And so it takes all of us putting our shoulder to this work, particularly given the fact that over the past decade, we've been the fastest growing state in the nation. So we've got to keep doing this work together. And thanks, Commissioner Frere. Any of our other elected officials from our area want to comment? You don't have to, but I want to give you the moment.
This is Blaine Fackrell, County Commissioner from Morgan County. And I just want to say again, it's been a great pleasure. Unfortunately, I have kids in the background because this is my day. This is my day to take care of them. So I'm sorry, but it's been a great pleasure working with Andrew and the group.
Commissioner Fackrell, we all know, or at least I know, and now everybody knows, that your most important title is Grandpa. And so you no need to apologize for having the grandkids in the background. We're just really happy that you're able to join us here. So, okay, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Thank you. I know that we spent a bunch of time on background stuff. Okay. Why are we here? Who's here? I wanted to do that in part for this sort of first meeting of the year, because our ability to know each other and to work together collaboratively is really important. This relationships and what JPAC does, bringing us together, we need to know each other in order to be successful in our work. So having said that, let's turn to the work, okay? As I mentioned to all of you earlier, and as you saw in the agenda, we have 3 topic areas that we're going to be talking about today. The first one is Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. We're going to turn to Mag to give us a brief overview of that plan and the schedule for this year. And then we're going to turn to Eileen from UDOT to talk about the message around the unified plan, how we're communicating about the plan. And then after that, we'll talk state legislative wrap up and federal transportation issues. I'll turn it over to Andrew Jackson, and a reminder, eating is acceptable in this meeting, which is what I'm about to start doing. So carry on.
Great, thank you. So I'll start off with a little bit about the history of the plan, and then have Sean Elliott get into the timing and some of the other elements of it. So, and Carlos, feel free to jump in at any time on this as we talk about it. So, as you may or may not be aware, each of the MPOs does a long-range plan for transportation. It's a 4-year plan that looks out 30 years into the future. So we redo it every 4 years. I believe the rural MPOs, or not rural MPOs, but the smaller MPOs that aren't TMAs, I think they have a 5-year cycle on their plans. So anyway, each MPO would do a plan every 4 years that looks out 30 years in the future. Several directors ago, we had some problems that were occurring, and JPAC in the Unified Plan, that was an attempt to kind of stop those things from happening. So what we had was one NPO who was adopting their plan a year or two before the other NPO. And so they would assume in their plan, they would assume all of the state funding available for the next 4 years. And so then when the next NPO had an opportunity to do their plan, they couldn't assume any funding because it had already been assumed by an adopted plan from one of the other NPOs. The second thing that we had was the NPO that couldn't assume any state funding would go to the federal government and get earmarks of like $1 million on a $20 million project or $1 million on a $40 million project. And then that would move those projects up because they had federal funding in them, but it also required some very thorough review processes according to the federal funding associated with it. So that was a problem. Another problem that we had, the third problem, was that some of the NPOs in the state would assume, say, the price of an interchange in today's funds, while another one assumed the price of an interchange in future dollars. And so when we go to the legislature and say, hey, we've got this interchange, it's $35 million, and another NPO would say, we've got this interchange and it's $65 million, the legislature would say, well, we're going to fund the $35 million one. They were actually the same type of interchange, same cost, et cetera. It's just how that money was determined, if it was today's dollars or if it was future dollars. And so there really wasn't any cost savings in picking one over the other. So we wanted to make sure that we were on the same plane with the cost. And then, of course, the timing of the plan, so that one MPO didn't do their plan, and then a couple of years later, another MPO did their plan, and they would conflict with each other. So JPAC was created, and as you look at the kind of the agreements that stipulate what the MPOs will do, what the transit agency will do, what the UDOT will do, it all goes back to going to getting onto the same schedule of adopting our plan. And so MAG adopted a plan, and then 2 years later adopted a new plan so that we would be on the same cycle as WFRC. And then the other MPOs, as they were created, came on and they went to that same cycle. And then it also tells that if we go, or guides says that if we go after federal funding, back in the day when that was possible, that we would agree to work together on that and make sure that it was the best use as those projects were identified. We also had to have the same cost assumptions. So same cost for a mile of freeway throughout the state, same cost for an interchange that's very similar in the same year of expenditure, whether that's in inflated dollars or today's dollars. And then also, and as I said, the timing of adopting the plans are the same. So we got to that point, and then the legislature, as we talked to them, they said that they wanted to be able to turn to everyone's separate regional transportation plan. And if they turn to page 40 in the 4 NPOs plans, the same thing should be on page 40. And if they turn to page 87, the same thing had to be on page 87. So we tried to do that, and what we ended up doing was having a lot of empty pages, as some had more detail than others, et cetera, where we're just trying to make sure that we all had the same chapters in the same order, et cetera. And we realized that didn't work. We also realized that not many legislators would be carrying around 4 or 5 different transportation plans and opening them all up and looking at the same page at the same time and comparing costs. So we decided instead to do a unified transportation plan. And as I pointed out before, it's really not a plan. It's an executive summary of our individual plans. And there is no statewide prioritized list of projects where, say, MAG would vote on Dixie MPO's projects, or UDOT would vote on Cash's projects, or WFC would vote on MAG. We don't do that. We vote on our own projects and we phase them in our long-range plans. And then as we get to our individual tips, then we prioritize and fund those projects. Basically, in our long-range plans, we're just putting them in phases and identifying costs associated with that. So it's not really a goal-driven problem-solving activity that you would expect from a plan. It's an executive summary of the plans. Let's see. And I think that's pretty much just kind of my summary. If somebody else wants to chime in on any of that genesis, happy to talk about that.
Thank you, Andrew. I know that Lanice Davenport, who is the relatively new MAG Regional Planning Manager, was going to join us to talk about this, was unable to at the last minute. Sean Elliott, were you intending to add anything here from MAG?
Yeah.
And then Sean, so I'm done with my part.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, so what I'd like to go over is how we as partners in the unified planning process, how we collaboratively work together to develop in this process common goals. Each one of the MPOs and UDOT, we all have goals that are similar and some that aren't, but in the process, we come together on creating goals for our statewide planning effort. We develop performance measures of how the projects are chosen or work. We develop planning time horizons, and we're all on the same horizons, which again, I think is something that is not the case in many other states. So we can say in the next 10 years, we're going to do this, and we all match up with the same years. And then financial assumptions, which Andrew touched on, we come together and we're all saying the same thing through this. In terms of structure, there's an overreaching policy or coordinating committee with 7 or 8 subcommittees. Each of these subcommittees have staff members from different, from UDOT and the MPOs and so forth, UTA. We have a finance subcommittee, performance measures, a safety subcommittee, GIS mapping, active transportation, communications, external forces and disruptions, and then also the modeling that goes into all of our efforts with that. And then the last part I'll bring up is this current update that we are working on. Obviously, we coordinate throughout our 4-year planning process as each of the MPOs and UDOT create their regional transportation plans and rural plans. And we will continue that through this update. We finalized, or will be finalizing the mapping and the messaging. We're all wrapping up our individual efforts, and we'll be seeking approval for each of our plans through our respective policy committees into next spring. And then we plan to have the unified plan completed in the fall of 2023, prior to the next legislative session. Let's see. Just one little tidbit of history on this. We've been doing the unified plan now since 2007, working together, which again, as mentioned, it's quite a feat. So if you want to go see more, it is on the web. It's at unifiedplan.org is where you can find the information about this. And with that, that's all I have to say. Are there any questions, or I think we're moving on to Eileen next too.
Sean, thank you very much. And we can take questions or comments from anybody here. I'll note Jory did drop the link to the Unified Plan website into the chat. That's the new unified plan. Sean, actually, I was going to ask you just for one moment to pull your screen back up, whoever was sharing that, because I want to look at that committee page one more time to use that to make the point, to reinforce something that Andrew Jackson said. And that is the nature of this effort that we do together. So pop back one slide, Sean. There you go. Andrew said something important, which is that, again, this group does not dictate what happens in any of the individual areas of the state. You know, you as local elected officials, you know, you have control over what happens in your areas. But what this group does do is that it allows us to integrate for all Utahns across all of these topic areas that you're seeing on the screen in front of you. And we talked about this, but each of these subcommittees, you can think of it as a process issue, but you can also think of it substantively, that we try to make sure that for the traveling public, for Utahns and our visitors, that we have consistency in the way that we're approaching each of these critical issues across the state. And then we have that ability to take back this collaborative work and weave that into all of the planning work that we do. Thank you very much, Sean. You can drop that down now. One of those subcommittees. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna add real quick, Andrew. Great points that you're making there. And additionally with that, the timing of projects. So it's not like you do one project in 1 year and then across the county boundary, you do another project 5 years later. We try and connect those so you don't see this. Some places across the country, you'll drive along and you'll see where the county road maintenance ends, or you go from one county to another and the road is just terrible. So we coordinate those in timing and make sure that if we've got a major project that spans several counties, that it's put together in a logical way.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Great point. We've been talking about the Unified Transportation Plan and what its role is and what its process is. One of the subcommittees for the Unified Transportation Plan is communications. And I'll in a moment, I'm going to turn to Eileen Barron from UDOT, who is the co-chair, Eileen, of that subcommittee. But really working on behalf of all of us, which is just really, really terrific. I'll just say one thing, Eileen, about the sort of message of the Unified Plan that I've found to be really important as we work with particularly state legislators, business leaders, community organizations. And that is that the fact that we have a plan that involves the public and community representatives and elected officials, that's transparent, that's based on goals and metrics, that has consistency across the state in the approaches, that has technical involvement, modeling, engineering, planning. So public involvement, technical rigor, coordination, transparency, good processes helps give confidence to decision makers. So that rather than having to ask the question, what projects are needed, they know based on all the work we do together, what projects are needed, and then they can turn their attention more to how do we accomplish those? How do we get the funding? And I just say that proof is in the pudding on that one, as we'll get to the outcomes of the state legislative session in a moment. But our state has made tremendous investments in all modes of transportation. And I think it's fair to say that part of the reason for that is because of the trust and confidence that our policymakers rightly have in the decisions we make and about the use of those limited public resources. So Eileen, hopefully what I just said was consistent with what you were intending to talk about, but I'll turn it over to you, Eileen.
Great, thank you. And again, I'm Eileen Barron with UDOT. I'm Communications Manager for Planning and Investment, and I'm here today on behalf of our Communications Subcommittee for the Unified Plan. And really that Unified Plan is an opportunity to tell a transportation story. And we're in this early stage of development where we often try to choose some key themes or messages to frame the plan. And so I want to open the floor to discuss that in just a moment, but I do want to let you know that our last iteration of the plan, our final deliverable was an electronic deliverable. And so we formatted it to be accessible as a website, which Dory has put the link there for you. And that is our plan once again. So as a communications subcommittee, we already sort of had this discussion about what should our final deliverable be. And we agree that that web accessibility is really helpful to all of the partnering agencies. We will have some kind of downloadable printable version, as well as like a short executive summary that would be an easy printout, because we know Andrew is famous for being able to hold up a prop when he's in committee meetings. And so we want to be sure Andrew and others still have, you know, some hard copy tangible prop that they can remind people of this resource. But as I was saying, we do frame, you know, the unified plan with a transportation story. And, you know, in the past, I think that past iteration, it largely focused on growth. Moving forward, you know, we have lots of interesting things happening in transportation related to technology, the discussions about equity, just there's a lot of directions we could go. And so because we're early in our process, I did want to take this opportunity to have some discussion among our JPAC members here about what you see as key themes that might frame this next iteration of the unified plan. And I want to just open the floor and hear your thoughts about some of those big transportation ideas that we have an opportunity to share with stakeholders statewide.
Eileen, can I, before we just open it up, can I ask you just to seed the ground here a little bit, if you will, by just ticking off a few of those themes that we've talked about to make sure that folks can have the ability to sort of react to something. And then I think for everybody here, this need not be finalized today. If you have input, we welcome that. And then the communication subgroup will go back and talk about this. And we will, I think, as each of our JPAC meetings this year, this will be a repeating theme that we talk about the unified transportation plan. So this is not the only opportunity. But Eileen, what are some of those sort of top level themes that we're already thinking about?
Yeah, so growth is definitely one of them. Changes in technology, funding, sustainability, equity, disruptors. So the chart that Sean shared, one of the subcommittees that wasn't on that graphic was a group talking about the disruptors, and some of that is technology. Some of it is related to well, COVID, for example, how that changed the way we are thinking about service. And I do think equity is one that's definitely in the forefront of our transportation conversations that that disruptor group is also focused on. And I'm just going to invite my other communications colleagues if I've left anything out to this point in terms of some of those key themes we've already been identifying.
Eileen, thanks. Yeah, Mike Savchek, who's our WFRC communications manager. Did you want to add anything to what Eileen just said before we open it up to everybody?
No, I think Eileen hit all of the topics that I had on my list.
Okay, great. See that collaboration? Okay, well, let's just open it up there. And there's no right or wrong answers. We're not making any final decisions today. Eileen went through a great list. What are your reactions to the list Eileen went through? Other ideas, other points you want to emphasize about our unified transportation plan?
You know, I'll go ahead and mention that also Utah's transportation vision, that kind of came together right immediately prior to the adoption of the current unified plan. And so you will see things about quality of life, and we try to tell some quality of life stories and show how that gets enacted in our projects collectively and collaboratively. And And so quality of life and those UVision principles of good health, better mobility, strong economy, and connected communities also can be an organizing structure that will continue.
Thanks. Now I want to see if any of our elected officials, city or county officials, I'm going to be gentle and try not to put people on the spot here, but I want to see if any of our elected officials want to comment on some of the themes of our transportation, our unified transportation plan going forward.
Andrew, Commissioner Scott here. I don't know that this is necessarily a theme, but with the recent spike in oil and gas prices, I'm just wondering if maybe that's something that could be addressed in the future, is how that affects driving habits. And, you know, obviously with the gas tax, possibly looking at a RUC charge and things like that, maybe how those are interrelated and would make a difference in the future.
That's a great point, which I think Eileen fits in with funding and uncertainty. That's a great point. Other comments from our elected officials or ideas or questions?
Yes, Andrew, if I could. One of the things that we see a lot of worry about when it comes to construction road projects is inflationary matters that are completely out of our control as we're looking into the future. And so I'm not sure how we address that or how we prepare for that. But I wonder if our limits in the way of 10% or whatever, if that is sufficient for what we're looking at in the short-term basis.
Commissioner Lee, when you say our limits at 10%, what do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of times we'll put like a 10% that we can, a buffer in there, for a project, whatever that buffer may be. If it needs to be more than that, I'm just wondering if we should, look to that and see what might happen and have a little bit more conversation on because we may be bumping up against those quite easily and then be blowing past them in some points in time too. And then that would cause us some other problems with projects.
Yeah, great point.
I think you're talking that contingency.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Most large contracts, this is Mayor Brian Cox, most large contracts that in my field have a required minimum amount of reserve for various such things. And that with the completion of the contract and it's gone through the warranty, then the reserve would go back to the MPO in this case.
Yeah, this is an important issue. I'm no engineer, but the uncertainty created by inflation, and then sort of thinking about that through the lens of JPAC and the Unified Transportation Plan, what assumptions are made for contingency and inflation in different areas or for different agencies? Are we using similar assumptions or are we using different assumptions? And that could get us into a little imbalance if we were using different assumptions. So that's definitely something I think perhaps the finance subcommittee could put some, I know that they've thought about this a lot already, but maybe put some thought into across agencies in the state.
Andrew?
Carlos?
Just maybe what the commissioner was referring to, we have a 10% limit if we have an engineer's estimate, and then if the bids come in 10% above that, then we can't just go right away to award. And if that's what he was referring to, that's put in place. That's a fairly strategic thing to do, to be able to have the contractors be more aware of where you are as an organization. And so we don't see that as a limiting factor. It forces us to go back through and do an evaluation of whether or not those prices were fair and competitive before we can make a decision on award. But if that's what he was referring to, that might, that it's just a procedural step for us, as long as there's enough project contingency in there. Now, something else to be aware of that's happening right now in the industry is that when contractors go to give us their bids, it's very interesting if you want to sit and watch a contractor, especially on large, $100 million projects, watch that team put it together. They're getting their quotes from whether it be, suppliers of aggregate to be, to metal, whatever it might be. They're getting their quotes right at the last minute. And what contractors are telling us now is those quotes that they're getting, they can't hold them the way they used to be able to hold them for as long a period of time. So they're being told, okay, we'll give you a price of $10 a yard, whatever the material might be. But we're only going to hold that price, for 10 days. And so it does put a constraint on how quickly we go through that process, if that's what the commissioner was referring to.
Yes, and thank you for that. And that was one factor that I was referring to. Being in construction in my past, there was times in which we were doing large projects over a year period of time, and we had bids from our suppliers, and they were only holding it for 30 days, and the metal prices went up, and we got ourselves really caught in an awkward spot. And so I'm just wondering how the 10% is great on the bidding process, but do we have things into place? Are we being consistent in the future too, as if they jump at such a rate that we can we're not being stymied by something?
Thanks, Commissioner, and Carlos, thanks for providing that information. I'll note Eileen just dropped into the chat some of the ideas that she had raised already: growth, changes in technology and innovation, sustainable funding sources, and she's capturing some of the ideas that we're talking about here: equity, disruptions such as COVID, which we didn't anticipate, other disruptors. So any other reactions? I see Mayor Ramsey has raised her hand. Go ahead, Mayor.
Hi, I apologize that I'm camera off right now.
You're okay.
And I don't know that this is actually contributes whatsoever to the plan, but I can't help but think that as we are looking at doing a statewide conversation about growth, part of the messaging I think should include the message from this group that we have a state transportation plan. I think there's a lot of people, when they express concerns over growth for the state of Utah, no matter where they live, transportation and the time they spend on the roads is pretty high on people's list. People are also concerned about air quality. I think if people maybe had a better understanding that we have a state transportation plan, a unified transportation plan, it's an important element that I think we need to just try to push from this group to make sure is part of the statewide conversation.
Mayor Ramsey, thanks for that comment. And I wonder if any of the other elected officials sort of would feel this would feel the same way. You're relating to your constituents all the time. I know that a few years ago, the League of Cities and Towns and WFRC jointly sponsored some polling, some survey work, and around growth issues. And one of the issues that consistently came back from residents was a perception that nobody was thinking about the future. And there were, candidly, developer giveaways. Now, they also noted that local governments are the most trusted of all levels of government, but there is less awareness that there are plans in place, that they have the ability to participate in those plans. And Mayor Ramsey was noting this statewide conversation on growth issues. That's something that the legislature funded at $1 million a year, $1 million this year or next fiscal year, through GOPB, Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, under the auspices of the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. And as she noted, we will have an opportunity, Mayor Ramsey and Commissioner Frere serve on that commission, as does Carlos. And you raise a good point, Mayor, making sure that people have an awareness of the planning that takes place. But other elected officials, what do you think? Does that make sense also about communicating about plans that are in place?
Yeah, Andrew, I think that one of the things that is very common, and again, we have to realize this is as much as it's a working group on the business side, there's also the political side. And that I think we've seen over the past couple of weeks throughout this state, people are pushing in different directions politically, which realistically turns around and affects this and other organizations. And I think people have to understand that there are plans, and this is long range thinking as far as what's going on. And we've got to try to communicate this, because I'm afraid that we're going to start to see some things start to roll over pretty quick. And if we lose the strength that we have to be able to accomplish the things we have been accomplishing, we're going to set ourselves back, 10 years. If that makes sense with what I'm saying. So
I think we're picking up what you're putting down, Commissioner Stevenson. In part, I know what you're alluding to is the fact that There's a lot of concern from residents about growth, what we sometimes refer to as NIMBYism, not in my backyard, which is a derisive label, but it really represents the fact that people are concerned about what's happening in their communities. And the result of that often is residents just saying to you, their elected officials, no, stop growth completely, which we know is not feasible. But then that interferes with our ability to work together to plan for the future and accommodate growth in a way that makes sense.
No, that's true. One other thing I was going to ask, in that plan, are we talking enough about electric vehicles and how things are going to start to change as far as that goes? I've been in California for the past number of days, and I'm totally amazed at how many electric vehicles are going up and down those freeways in California. And, it's just around the corner here. Do we need to talk more about it and, how we're going to be able to handle it and work that aspect?
I mean, Eileen, I think the answer to that is probably undoubtedly yes. And this almost goes to the point. UDOT has been leading out on and working collaboratively with the public and private sector on EV infrastructure, charging, and how much are people aware of that fact? How much do we need to be communicating that about? And that relates, of course, back to energy security and all sorts of other issues that are on our minds with the war in Ukraine and rising gas prices as well. This is great conversation. We got some time for maybe 2-3 more comments. Any of our other elected officials want to comment here?
Yeah, Andrew, this is Gage. So, as we discussed yesterday with the Governor's Economic Opportunity Commission, that the going ahead, the issue with growth will be with us, and probably the most significant issue that, at least in northern Utah, we're facing this year. And I think Bob mentioned it very clearly, that's becoming a political issue that we have to deal with, or that will be changed where some of these plans will not be able to go forward because there will be a group elected that will take the attitude, we're just going to stop it, which is not healthy. So this money that the state put forth through the legislature, I think it's very important, as I mentioned yesterday, that we communicate that down to the city councils, in public hearings and our planning commissions. The public needs to know that they have a say-so in this, and we have to give them the opportunity to have a say-so, i.e. public hearings, planning commissions, et cetera. At the same time, we have to realize that sometimes those vocal groups that show up aren't always the majority of the people. So, which means we still have to make some hard decisions as elected officials. So, but yeah, growth, as I've just seen the last 2 or 3 weeks from a political environment, has really exploded.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I'll note, Trustee Holbrook from UTA echoed what Mayor Ramsey said, which is consistent, Commissioner, with what you just said as well. Anyone else? Maybe last comment here from our elected officials about this topic area? Yeah, Commissioner Almquist.
Well, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Down in southern Utah, 2 things are not going to happen. Politically, there's not going to be the word moratorium spoken of. The second thing is that we will plan better. And we've loved what the federal partners and UDOT coming down last week. We took tours. They see clearly that one thing, they've done an amazing job in being ahead of the game with our southern corridor. The northern corridor is bogged down with environmental mishmash and some intrigue behind that all, which we'll overcome. But I do have a huge shout out to UDOT for that. The federal partners spoke, and they were on the tour too, that our growth, not only Utah is the fastest growing, but now they've declared Washington County is the fastest growing county in the nation. And so I don't mind that, but I also don't want gridlock either. So thank you for your help. But we're not going to even approach that discussion about saying, okay, nobody else can come here. And I speak for my other 2 commissioners. We're just going to plan for it. But I did have a question I put in the chat about the inland port that plays a big deal into Cedar City and Iron County. and then spills over a little bit with us. I was just wondering if their infrastructure requirements are being discussed in our plan.
Oh, that's a great question. First, Commissioner, your point noting the rapid growth that's occurring fastest in the nation in your area, critical. And I think that some of us might really welcome having an opportunity at some point this year, maybe not at the meeting that we have when July, I think is or June. Maybe that's not the best time to visit your area of the state, but I don't know, September, December could be a good time to visit for a site visit, perhaps. Yep. Myron Lee, also from your area, from the Dixie MPO, noted something that relates to what you're talking about, which is water availability being a growth constraint, Washington County and other areas of the state. Your other point about these mega projects, the inland port and its satellites, are the infrastructure needs being considered? Yes. Are the plans for the inland port and its satellites completely determined so that we know what the infrastructure needs will be? No. That's the short answer. But I think you're raising that is actually a critical element of what we try to do with the Unified Transportation Plan, which is we don't look at transportation in isolation. We look at it in relation to housing trends and growth trends and economic development and innovation, and recognize the impacts that those things have on transportation and that transportation has on those areas. So it's a great point.
I know that Iron County is moving forward with their railway connection. We don't have one down here. We have one at the All Abilities Park, and it's a mile long and it goes in a circle. That's our only train. But we do feel like we are a fair weather port for semis and altering how they get their goods, whether they are loaded onto some, trailers in Cedar City or west of Cedar City at the train. You're right. It's such a moving target. We aren't sure. I just think that we should have a paragraph somewhere in it that says, in the next 20 years, this will be a reality. We need to think about it.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, this is exactly the kind of dialogue that we wanted to have with you, the elected officials. I know that there are many people on the staffs of the agencies who have a lot of great ideas and who would love to jump in and contribute here, but I'm gonna not have that happen now, respectfully, because we're gonna take this feedback and then we're gonna use it and incorporate it as we on the staffs have further dialogue through those committees that we laid out to you, okay? But this dialogue was really terrific. Hopefully I'm not offending any of my partners too much in with that approach here. And then we will move on, okay? Again, we have two more issues or two more topics on the agenda here. They relate to each other in a way. One is state legislative outcomes, and the other is what's going on federally and federal legislative outcomes. Before we move on to that, I do just want to note, I saw Tooele City Councilman Dave McCall joined us. Councilman McCall, welcome. Thanks for being here. If there's anybody else, any of our other elected officials who joined and missed introductions at the beginning, just say so. We want to recognize you. I'm not seeing anybody, but just making sure. Okay. All right. Carlos, will you please talk to us about the outcomes of the state legislative session on transportation?
Absolutely, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be quick, and apologies to Jay and to Myron, who were on the panel with us a couple days ago. They've seen this before. I will try to share a screen. I don't really do this usually, so see if I can figure out how to do it. It looks like it. And I assume that's being seen.
Congratulations, you did it.
Okay. Got three screens. I don't know which one I'm supposed to move, but we'll give it a try. So here's just a summary. I'm going to just talk money. There was a little over $1 billion of one-time money that was allocated to or through the department. And this is kind of a summary sheet, and then I'll have a few more slides that talk a little bit more specifically about these. So about 806 million for roads, 150 for transit, 40 for active transportation, $1 million that was set aside to match any federal grants we get for wildlife crossings. And then I'll touch a little bit on the next slide on this House Bill 409, which for us at the department was a $16.2 million. This was, well, I'll jump to it right now. There we go. So this was creation of a adventure infrastructure restricted account 1% earmark. So that's an ongoing earmark, 1% of the state general funds, estimated at $36 million for FY23. And you can see the purpose there on that slide. They appropriated one time, so just one-time money, 16.2 million to the Transportation Investment Fund. That's basically the fund that is contains a sales tax that we do normally the larger projects out of. So just a one-time appropriation. 10 million is meant to for paved pathways, and it has a 20% match. 6.2 was either for paved pathways or for access to state parks. What they're primarily interested in with that money is actually building, what seems simple, accel decel lanes, turn lanes into some of the state parks. There's going to be a new state park off of 191 just outside of Moab for Raptor State Park. And I know there's a big safety issue leaving Deer Creek State Park. And so it's issues of trying to address the really access in and out of the state parks was what was the big driver behind that 6.2. Transportation Commission will prioritize those projects. This is a little more fine tuning. So the 806 is intended to, quote, really accelerate existing projects that are on the program today. We're programmed into 2030. So we've taken the revenues that are anticipated in the Transportation Investment Fund. Again, 20.68% of the statewide sales tax goes to the Transportation Investment Fund. The commission picks the projects. We've selected projects out into 2030. That's probably $5-6 billion. Terry will correct me on that one if I'm too far off, of projects that we're currently working on in some form or other, whether it be environmental or design or whether it's in construction. And the intent with this 806 is to try to move some of those projects forward in time, to accelerate them. And so that will allow us to move some projects are constrained by money. Those are the types of projects we can move up. Some projects are constrained by project process. And what I mean by that is it could be in the environmental document, it could be in the design process, it could be in procurement, whatever it might be. So we'll be looking to identify the amount we can accelerate those projects within the program and hopefully have that work ready to be public in the June timeframe. I already talked about the, sorry, I'm gonna try to put my glasses on, I might be able to see. The I-215 frontage road, that's a frontage road project. So these are projects that were identified in legislation. So that's a project that's, the environmental's done. So it's, if you think I-215 on the west side belt loop, where this new state office building is in Taylorsville, this provides, I'll say, the money. It identifies where we're supposed to take the money, but identifies the money to go to construction on that. And so that's a project that's probably quite, since the environmental is done, could move pretty quickly. I talked about the state access, and the mitigation is intended up on by Interstate 84 and the more in the Weber County area it's one of the higher deer kill areas in the state. And the intent was that there's going to be, we anticipate some federal grant opportunities, and this was to be able to match those grant opportunities. This one here are a little more fine-tuned. We were directed to do an environmental analysis on the interchange by US 6 and I-15 in Spanish Fork. We're instructed to do an extension of 90th South, which 90th South is a state road, but then it basically ends out on the west. And the communities are interested in having that extended out to intersect with U-111 out to the west. Right now, Old Bingham Highway and New Bingham Highway make that connection. And so there's $10 million set aside for that. We have the word transfer there. We'll have to work through this. Our intent was, well, since the local government had made that request, we would transfer that money to them. But that still can be discussed. We talked about the paved pedestrian projects. I want to thank, the council, Andrew and the whole Wasatch Front team were really helpful in helping. This was part of the governor's budget, helpful in helping identify the importance of this and moving that through. We were asked to transfer 35 million to MAG and to do the environmental analysis on basically a reconfiguration of the interchange up on 84 in Mountain Green. It's an unusual split interchange right now, and they're interested in consolidating that into a single point. It'll be a very, I'll say, challenging interchange with the river and the railroad there. But we have been buying the property over the last couple of years, so it's something we've been working on. And then this last slide, I had some redundancies, but I just highlighted. Oh, no, I had already mentioned that. So, this I should have highlighted, I guess, SR 92 extension. So this is down in the Lehigh area. So this is an extension of the SR 92 going west. It would be essentially through the Thanksgiving Golf Club there and intersecting with a road that Lehigh City is extending to the north. This would not extend all the way over to Redwood Road. We have a little issue of Camp Williams out there. And so this would be doing the environmental work to look at that extension. And Andrew, that would, there's been some other things. You mentioned the $1 million going to GOPV to look at basically a visioning process to try to have a conversation about growth over the next year or so with the communities. And also the department received an additional $600,000. We currently get $900,000 a year to use to help to do planning aid with local governments in what we call emerging areas. So these are those fast growing areas outside the MPO areas. That's really where a lot of big decisions are being made that can affect, what that community looks like in the future. And so this is to provide additional planning resources. So we got a bump from 900,000 to 1.5 million ongoing for us to be able to help work with local communities on those planning efforts. And, from a money perspective, that was kind of a quick summary, Andrew.
Carlos, thank you very much. I'm going to make just a few comments about this here. And I don't know if, Terry Newell, the UDOT Deputy Director, Ben Hewitt may want to supplement here. That'll be up to them, you guys, if you want to, our great partners. But the legislature, let me relate this back a little bit to the Unified Transportation Plan. Okay. We talked about the Unified Transportation Plan, identifying transportation projects that need to be invested in the future. And a critical element of that Unified Transportation Plan is that it is multimodal, that it gets at road, transit, and active transportation. And as Carlos was just going through all of that, if you sum up the total amount of money, one-time general fund dollars that the state legislature put into transportation this year, it's around $1.2 billion. And I want to make two high-level comments about that 1.2 billion. Beyond the fact that that's a lot of money, and that should be seen as an endorsement of the importance of investing in infrastructure. But that money went to state roads and to transit and to active transportation. Okay, in a way for transit and active transportation that's beyond anything that's ever happened before. An acknowledgement by the legislature of the importance of investing in all modes of transportation. And I'll also note the biggest bucket of money out of that 1.2 billion and the biggest bucket that goes to UDOT is Carlos. It's interesting because there was an $800-ish million number that was, advanced projects. and then a few much, much smaller numbers for specific projects. The thing to take away there is that for the most part, the legislature didn't dictate or earmark money to projects. They said, essentially, we respect and value the process that you all use. Here is more money to advance the projects that you decide through your processes are the right ones to be invested in. That's a big deal. In my book, that's a big deal. Terry, can I put you on the spot because you're such a great partner with us and all of the agencies on doing this planning and programming work. Do you want to add to this?
I don't have a lot more to say than just that I'll echo what you said, Andrew, and it is great that they respected the process and everything I think we've been working on for the last couple of years has been to have people invest in the long range plan with their time. And then we can see that what's happened is the legislature has been willing to invest in the long range plan. So I think that's really great progress for us. So just support what you said.
Thanks, Terry. I think I know we're going to turn to federal issues in just a moment here, but I think we should just take a minute on other things that emerged from the state legislative session. Others can jump in here, but one thing I do want to note on the relationship between transportation and land use, because again, we don't do transportation in isolation with blinders on. We look at transportation as it relates to housing and economic development and environmental issues, et cetera, is the requirement that was just adopted that every city with transit stations, fixed guideway transit stations, do station area plans. And I didn't talk about this with you, but Commissioner Holbrook, Trustee Holbrook, you were really involved in working with us to put together this station area plan legislation. Can I put you on the spot to just give a little perspective on that as a UTA trustee and also as a former city elected official from Bountiful?
Thanks, Andrew. I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, that has been one of the most exciting, in my opinion, opportunities to really kind of coordinate not just what cities are doing, but to focus on that transit piece and that investment in infrastructure that would already be there and to maximize it. This legislation, House Bill 462, set up the requirement to incorporate station area planning, and that would be throughout our system. It would certainly include front runner stations as well as track stations and BRTs as well. The goal, of course, is to talk about the fact that this is a regional component, that when we look at these things, Mill Creek itself, I'll use Mayor Silvestrini City as an example, doesn't technically have a track station within their city districts, but they are adjacent to one. And one of those things that's really critical is to understanding the impacts of what any transit investment is going to do when it talks about housing and connecting to transit. You can't have these dialogues in a vacuum either, considering the cost of housing that has just gone up so exponentially. And I think that if we can all work towards this and maximize our land use and our zoning around these areas and understand what's going to be in these particular areas, this is going to add value throughout the Wasatch Front. And I know that Andrew and his team also worked really, really hard along with the league to focus on getting this so that this structure incorporates elements that not only talk about the housing pieces, but also those other connectivity pieces as well. We know that in bus rapid transit, obviously UDOT is a critical partner in that. The elements that we can expect to see is an increased opportunity to see where that development can go to maximize it. I can talk specifics, but I think that just generally speaking, that is one of the best examples, I think. It also came from the city perspective, the opportunity to really take a look at a location within your community or adjacent to another community is really valuable, because we all know that there are certain locations that just get a lot of traffic in general. So if you're all planning for that, I think you're going to have the maximum success in doing that. And having these housing dialogues is difficult and sometimes in different communities, but we think that this is going to add exponential value to that. Anything else? I think I just want to mention one other thing. The league is actually doing some, for your city people, the league is actually doing some training specific to station area planning that will talk about how this will be impactful within your communities. They're doing it later this month, April 13th and 14th, I believe. But I know that our TOD team is also going to be talking with all of our communities that are going to be impacted so that we all have this understanding of what legislative actions can happen, how all of these things can be impactful. I hope that helps, Andrew. And if there's anything else.
Andrew, can I jump in too?
Sure, Jay.
Yeah, so I just you know, Trustee Holbrook used the word a number of times, was communities. And I think one of the things that the stationary plans sort of cement for this region is shifting the dialogue from transit-oriented development to transit-oriented communities. That development is, you know, necessarily involves the communities, and the communities should necessarily be involved in that development. And yeah, it was Phil Washington was the biggest early proponent of transit-oriented communities from LA Metro, and it's become essentially that whole arm of transit and transit agencies has been rebranded or is being rebranded to transit-oriented communities. Where I came from at SEPTA, the program was rebranded to transit supportive community development. And I want to add to it, the nice thing is it widens the real estate development picture to necessarily involve the planning engagement team here at UTA. So, you know, this is what Nicole Bordeaux and her team, she's on, and Russ do every day. So, you know, it's bringing together in a more holistic way a development, that sort of combined private development, but with the communities in mind.
Beth, Jay, thanks a lot for your description of that. I'll ask Miranda if Jones-Cox from WFRC, would you please drop into the chat the legislative session summary that we put together. That goes over a lot of the appropriations information for transportation and for growth issues, as well as providing a summary and linking to even more detailed summary of HB 462, which gets at station area plans that Beth and Jay would be talking about. And Jay, I think your point about transit-oriented communities is an important one. That is not every community, but for those communities that do have high-capacity transit service, those are great areas around those stations to absorb growth and have mixed-use, vibrant nodes of development. It's a great way to help us absorb our growth and at the same time preserve the character of other existing single-family, predominantly single-family neighborhoods. So thanks a lot, everybody, for the discussion on the state side. Lots of other stuff happened. We don't have time to go into all of it, but thank you to all the partners that we have on this Zoom and others that work so hard to have a really successful state legislative session. Speaking of successful legislative sessions, let's now turn our attention to Washington, our nation's capital, where the running line now is that, you know, there's very little bipartisanship and Congress doesn't get much done. But the great news is that one of the major accomplishments of the past year is the adopting by Congress and signing by the president of a 5-year transportation infrastructure bill. Well, actually, it goes beyond just transportation, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. And right on cue, Brigitte from FHWA popped up a presentation. And Brigitte, I'll turn to you to give a summary about this bipartisan infrastructure law. And then after you do that, we'll give Jay a few minutes to talk about transit aspects of it. Brigitte, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Appreciate this opportunity to speak to everybody. I am going to provide a very high-level overview of some of the highway provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. It's also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As the table shows, bill represents a historic investment in our nation's infrastructure. FHWA will receive more than $350 billion over 5 fiscal years, including contract authority and advance appropriations from the general fund. It's important to understand the different funding sources, as general fund money is typically more restrictive and may expire. Bill funds highway programs and activities for 5 years through September of 2026. The act includes over $300 billion in contract authority, or essentially a 29% increase in federal aid funding over FY21 levels. It also includes an additional $47.3 billion in advanced appropriations from the general fund of the Treasury. FHWA has received general fund appropriations in the past, but not on this scale. There are more than a dozen new highway programs. This includes 2 new apportioned funding programs, one relating to resilience, the Protect Formula program, and one focused on reducing transportation-related emissions, Carbon Reduction Program. 2 other new formula programs relating to bridges and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Several new discretionary grant programs, including programs related to bridges, electric vehicle charging, surface transportation projects in rural areas, resilience, wildlife crossings, and reconnecting communities. Bill focuses on investing in safety, bridges, addressing climate change, promoting resilience, and accelerating project delivery. Several new programs offer new opportunities for local governments and other non-traditional entities to receive highway funding. FHWA has not previously distributed this type of funding to non-state entities on this scale. FHWA is working to identify program stakeholders so that we can coordinate outreach and assist these entities with accessing new funding. Under Bill, the highway account of the Highway Trust Fund will receive a $90 billion transfer from the general fund, which would keep it solvent for years. As you likely know, Highway Trust Fund receipts have not kept pace with obligations for several years, and Congress has previously made several transfers from the general fund in order to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent. This chart shows the amounts that Utah received in formula funds for fiscal year 2022 for FHWA programs. It totals over $460 million, and many of these programs include mandatory distributions to the MPOs. Traditionally, FHWA has provided funding mostly through apportioned programs to states, as well as Puerto Rico, territories, tribes, and federal land management agencies. While Bill continues to provide funding to these traditional recipients, several of the new discretionary programs include eligibility for local governments, MPOs, tribes, territories, and federal land management agencies, as well as other entities. Please note this table doesn't include all Bill programs or eligible entities, and there are additional nuances that aren't represented in the table. Bill established a new discretionary grant program to support local Vision Zero and related initiatives to prevent transportation-related deaths and injuries. It is funded at $1 billion in each of fiscal years 22 through 26, for a total of $5 billion in advanced appropriations from the general fund. MPOs, local governments, and tribal governments are eligible to compete for this grant funding. Notably, states are not eligible for this funding, and the grants may be used for planning grants to develop comprehensive safety action plans, and 40% of the funding is set aside for this use each fiscal year. Funding may also be used for planning, design, and development activities, for infrastructure projects, and other strategies identified in such action plans. In awarding the grants, DOT is required to consider the extent to which each applicant and eligible project is likely to significantly reduce or eliminate transportation-related fatalities and serious injuries involving various road users. We are anticipating that more specific guidance and the notice of funding opportunity will be coming out in the next few months for this program. And we've been told that the administration expects to make approximately 800 awards annually under this program.
Brigitte, I can't help but interject on Safe Streets for All that the person who had within the administration that had the most responsibility as an individual for promoting that program in the bill was Robin Hutchison, who was formerly, many people know, worked here in Utah in the transportation industry and learned a lot about the role of local governments and transportation agencies from her time here, and then took that to the Secretary's office at USDOT. Thanks, Brigitte. Keep going.
As noted earlier, the PROTECT program is a new program to provide grants for resilience improvements. PROTECT has formula and discretionary components. This slide covers the discretionary component. It authorizes $1.4 billion over 5 years in contract authority. This will come from the Highway Trust Fund. The DOT is required to use not less than 25% of the funding for grants for projects located in areas that are outside an urbanized area with a population of over 200,000. And not less than 2% of the funding must be used for grants to Indian tribes. Funds for the discretionary component will be distributed by competitive grants with 4 different grant categories: planning grants, resilience improvement grants, community resilience and evacuation route grants, and at-risk coastal infrastructure grants. Again, the amount of entities that can go after this funding are extensive, including the MPOs, locals, and tribal governments. Eligible entities must apply to DOT for grants, and projects include highway projects, public transportation facilities or services, a facility or service for intercity rail passenger transportation, and port facilities. The Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program is a new program to provide discretionary grants to fund the strategic deployment of publicly accessible EV charging infrastructure and hydrogen, propane, and natural gas fueling infrastructure along designated alternative fuel corridors and in communities. Bill authorizes $2.5 billion over 5 years and contract authority from the Highway Trust Fund. Again, this is a competitive grant program open to a wide variety of recipients. Eligible projects include acquisition and installation of publicly accessible charging or fueling infrastructure or traffic control devices. For newly installed infrastructure, the law allows use of funds to provide operating assistance for the first 5 years after installation. DOT is required to update and redesignate alternative fuel corridors and establish a reoccurring process to regularly update and redesignate such corridors. The law reserves 50% of the amounts made available each fiscal year for community grants that are expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to expand or fill gaps in access to publicly accessible charging and fueling infrastructure, including development phase activities and acquisition and installation of infrastructure. These projects may be located on any public road or in any other publicly accessible locations, such as parking facilities of public buildings, public schools, public parks, or in publicly accessible parking facilities owned or managed by a private entity. Eligible entities may contract with a private entity to acquire, construct, install, maintain, or operate charging and fueling infrastructure. For community grants, priority will be given to projects that expand access to EV charging, alternative fueling infrastructure in rural areas, low and moderate income neighborhoods, and communities with a low ratio of private public spaces to households, or a high ratio of multi-unit dwellings to single-family homes. The Bridge Investment Program is a new program to improve bridge condition, safety, efficiency, and reliability. It is a complement to the Bridge Formula Program, in which Utah will receive $45 million per year for 5 years. UDOT, our understanding, plans to use the money to fix 150 bridges, most of which are local off-system bridges. Bill includes a total of $12.5 billion over 5 years for the Bridge Investment Discretionary Program. $3.3 billion of this is authorized contract authority coming from the Highway Trust Fund, and $9.2 billion is appropriated budget authority coming from the general fund. The law allows DOT to award grants to certain large projects under a multi-year grant agreement, similar to FTA's Capital Investment Grants Program, and requires that at least 50% of program funds be used for large projects each fiscal year. An average of $40 million per year is set aside for tribal transportation facility bridges, which are considered part of the Tribal Transportation Program, and federal share for those funds is 100%. The bill establishes a new rural surface transportation grant program, a discretionary grant program focused on improving and expanding surface transportation infrastructure in rural areas to increase connectivity, improve safety and reliability of the movement of people and freight, and generate regional economic growth and improve quality of life. Note that the Act defines a rural area as an area that is outside an urbanized area with a population of over 200,000. The program is funded at $2 billion in contract authority from the Highway Trust Fund over the 5 years. Eligible projects include highway, bridge, or tunnel projects that are eligible under our typical formula funding, highway freight projects eligible under the National Highway Freight Program, highway safety improvement projects, and highway and bridge projects that improve access and support the rural economy, amongst others. The program includes several funding set-asides, including up to 10% for small projects, 25% for projects on designated routes of the Appalachian Development Highway System, and 15% for projects in states with greater than average rural roadway fatalities resulting from rural roadway lane departure crashes. The bill established a new local and regional project assistance program, a discretionary grant program for transportation infrastructure projects with significant local or regional impact. This codifies the existing RAISE program that was previously established through Appropriations Acts and which was formerly known as Tiger and Build. The Act provides $7.5 billion in advanced appropriations from the general fund over the 5 fiscal years. A variety of entities are eligible to apply, and a variety of surface transportation projects are eligible, including highway bridge projects eligible under Title 23, as well as public transportation projects and passenger or freight rail projects. There are currently several notice of funding opportunities open with applications due in the near future. The first is for the RAISE program with applications due April 14th. The second includes 3 new programs for mega projects, freight and highway projects of national or regional significance, and a rural surface transportation grant program. One application serves all 3 programs and is due May 23rd. The third is an FTA announcement for low or no emissions vehicles and buses. Applications for that program are due May 31st. And then for more information on Bill, please visit our website. New information and guidance are being added to the website on a continuous basis as it's being developed. And if you're looking for more information about any of the programs, formula or discretionary, we encourage you to visit the website. This presentation was originally like 73 slides and I narrowed it down. So I cut out a lot but it is all available on the website. So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Brigitte, thank you so much. As you can tell, there's so much in this massive infrastructure bill, including not just an increase in formula programs and stability, but over the next 5 years, which is fabulous, but also lots of new discretionary grant programs. I'm going to turn to Jay Fox in a moment to talk about transit. But one of the things that we were hoping, we're not really going to have time to have a dialogue about this here, but is for all of us together to be coordinating on identifying priorities we can work on to seek discretionary grant funding for projects that are important, that cut across sometimes modes of transportation, that cut across jurisdictional boundaries, that we all can get on board with and support. Rather than competing against each other, let's work together. So I would encourage any of you, the elected officials from your communities, to talk to your metropolitan planning organization, or UDOT or UTA, if you have ideas or questions, and let's try to work together. I know this is dialogue that we at the MPOs and UDOT and UTA are having. We'll do better if we identify projects that we all can support, and projects that are in and emerge from Utah's Unified Transportation Plan that we talked about before. That plan is the process for identifying priorities. The plan, and then the first phase, the first 10 years of that plan, identify priorities for near-term funding. That's the best place to look as a starting point for what should we be going to the federal government and saying, please help us. Okay. Okay, Jay, give us an overview then, if you would, about the transit pieces, please.
Yeah, and I'll go, no time is short, so I'll go through some of the most important points. So, I mean, I guess the way I would sum it up is a lot. There is a lot of funding that comes with this act. And I want to start with numbers that would make anybody happy, which is how's the formula plan increase, and that it's 18% just for 2022, from 5.4 billion nationally to 6.3, and then by 2026 the program grows to 6.9 billion. What does that mean for UTA? Across the UTAs that we provide service to, it's $135 million over 5 years. And that's tremendous, because that's money that's destined for us. It's, we don't, let's put the competitive part aside. That's formula funds for additional state of good repair projects, system modernization upgrades, additional rolling stock, and many other, capital priorities. So that was, very, very important to UTA. Additionally, the state of good repair, again, nationally over 5 years, $23 billion. That's, will be in pushed down discretionary programs other than the money that I talked about that will come in formula. And that includes an annual $300 million competitive rail vehicle replacement program, which is very important to us as we look at the front runner forward work, as well as the fact that our light rail network is aging. So it's not only rail, but it's vehicles as well. We have 40 vehicles in the Blue Line, which are not level boarding, not ADA compliant. So it gives us the ability to go after funds to replace them as well. You could get, when you look at the act, you can get really starstruck with the amount of money for capital. I don't want to put aside the fact that there's money for technical assistance and workforce development in there. This is a rapidly growing region. The service demands on this region are going to be tremendous. Meeting those service demands are meaningless if we don't have the people to do it, if we don't have the bus drivers and the mechanics and the rail operators. So that program increased to $12 million annually, up from 7.5, and that addresses HR needs and employment training and recruitment. And I know for those in our region, that we've really been ahead of the curve on that, on our apprenticeship programs and on our recruiting efforts. But any additional funds to make that happen are really important, because it's not just about the infrastructure; it's also about the enterprise. It's about growing the enterprise long term. As was mentioned before, the Capital Investment Grant Program has grown tremendously, $3 billion a year nationally, up from $2 billion previously. I think one really important aspect of that is the core capacity projects fit in that. So those are corridor-based investments in fixed guideway systems that improve capacity not less than 10%. And that's for a corridor where capacity is, we're at capacity either today or in 10 years. And I use that, I say 10 years because that's a change in this act. Previous time frame was 5 years. This was a significant change which UTA sought with our federal delegation, and it's really great to see that in there. It gives us a much, particularly post-COVID, a much larger time frame, which to show that we're going to be at capacity and then qualify for those funds. I'll say just briefly on the bus and bus facility side, I mentioned the low and no competitive grants. I said this the other day when I was at Utah ITE. The previous program was for $180 million. It is now funded at $1.1 billion per year. So that comes with a number of obligations, including applicants submitting a zero emission fleet transition plan. But the commitment by the federal government to low and no emission vehicles is tremendous, and it's seen as now as a national initiative, not just limited to pilot projects or specific capital projects. So I think we're really excited by that, and internally we're ahead of the curve on that as well, working on what's our fleet strategy over the next 10, 15, 20 years, what's our fleet mix, so that we can make competitive grants and show a zero emission fleet transition plan. And then I guess I'll just wrap up by saying that there are other projects that that we're part of in this. The mega projects were discussed before, because those include Chapter 53 projects, which are transit projects that tie to the other eligible projects that are there for these mega projects that are available. Even CRISI projects, which one normally thinks of as for intercity passenger rail. There are a couple of very small but important changes in that funding that I believe will make our agency eligible to apply for those grants. And on top of that, we do, even though the hours are late at night, we do tie to the national network. And I argued, and I think other agencies have been successful for their grant applications just on that alone. So hopefully that gives you just a quick overview. But I mean, the excitement is really strong here, and there's a lot of opportunities to expand our infrastructure and look at service long term with some really good federal funding.
Jay, thanks. And I think that knowledge and background you have in working in transit and the federal government is going to serve us well as we go forward in implementing these programs, as well as the collaboration among all of us. I'll just make one brief concluding comment about the federal work, and that is that those of you that have been involved with JPAC for several years may remember that we together developed a set of shared principles for federal reauthorization of transportation programs several years ago. Carlos, I remember talking with you a few years ago and sort of predicting what might happen in Washington. And I remember feeling, and you and I saying, if Congress would just pass a long-range bill that just provided flat, stable funding, like that would be enough. And then look where we ended up. Not only do we have stability and predictability for 5 years, but we actually have increases which will allow us to accommodate some of the inflation that we've seen, as well as the ability to compete for additional discretionary grant dollars. And I'm happy to say that those principles, those shared reauthorization principles, which Miranda just dropped in the chat, almost all of them were embodied in this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is great. Now it's just our job to put all that money to good work and to good use for the benefit of Utahns now and for future generations, which is what we do here in Utah. So everybody, thank you very much. Great discussion, great partnership. Our next meeting is June 2nd. The location of that meeting is yet to be confirmed. Is that another virtual? Is it in person? Do we do a field trip? We're going to figure that out soon. Anybody that has input about what we do next on agendas or locations, please feel free to share them with us. Does anybody else have any concluding comments that they want to offer here?
Thank you.
I just asked if perhaps we can get those PowerPoint presentations that they presented. I thought there was a lot of information that me personally, I'm drinking from a fire hose. So it'd be good to have that.
You bet. And I know Andrea is already planning on doing this. We'll send out to everybody on the whole JPAC list all the presentations and links to the information that we discussed here.
Yeah, and Andrew, I'm going to add the fact sheets from FTA and link to them because there's so much information there, but you can look by program, so that will be helpful.
Okay, great. We'll leave this meeting open just for a few minutes if anybody wants to grab things out of the chat. But as I said, we'll also include those in a follow-up email to everybody. Okay.
Jennifer posted a full presentation for Federal Highway as well. So
okay,
it's in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Brigitte and Jennifer. Okay. Anything else? Have a great afternoon, and thanks everybody for the great partnership and collaboration.